Okay, tonight, we're entering a story that feels less like history and more like a shadow that never left. A soft suburban silence was broken by a cry, and that cry would haunt America for generations. This is not just a crime. It is an unsolved mystery, a cold case wrapped in a dark past, where the innocence of a child became the weight of a nation's fear. Welcome to Criminal Mindcast, the podcast where we tell true crime stories, not only with facts but with silence, with the haunting weight of what was never spoken. Here, each detail matters, and each pause carries the same gravity as evidence itself. Tonight, we return to the haunting tale of the Lindbergh baby kidnapping, America's most infamous unsolved mystery. A child stolen, a family shattered, and a nation left trembling. Decades later, the echoes of that night still linger, a chilling reminder of innocence lost and questions that refuse to fade. The Lindbergh baby kidnapping did not emerge from nowhere. To understand its gravity, we must first step into the world where it happened, into a family that appeared untouchable yet carried invisible fractures beneath the surface. Charles Lindbergh was not merely a man, he was a symbol. In 1927, his solo flight across the Atlantic transformed him from aviator to living legend, a figure of hope in a turbulent age. But symbols are not people. Behind the adoration lay isolation, pressure, and expectations that no single human being could sustain. The Lindbergh home, set apart on a secluded estate in Hopewell, New Jersey, looked serene. It was surrounded by woods, and silence fell across the property like a curtain. Yet silence does not always mean safety. Within that house lived Charles Lindbergh, Jr., a 20-month-old boy whose innocence would soon be eclipsed by a tragedy far larger than his short life. He was adored by his parents, but he was also born into a paradox, the warmth of family intertwined with the cold scrutiny of public fame. Anne Morrow Lindbergh, his mother, was a woman of intelligence, grace, and fragility. She had been thrust into a life where privacy was scarce and every move was judged by others. Behind her public image was a quieter world of longing for normalcy, a desire for a safe and ordinary home. Yet such safety was impossible, for fame does not allow stillness. In psychology, this is often the paradox of celebrated families. The more the world admires them, the more they are cut off from the very community that provides protection. The home itself reflected this paradox. Designed as a retreat, it became a fortress. Tall windows looked out into forests, but those forests also concealed. In criminology, environment matters. Isolation often invites danger, and privilege creates blind spots. The Lindbergh estate was no different. Though it embodied wealth, it also carried vulnerabilities. Few neighbors lived close by. The grounds were difficult to patrol, and the sense of security may have been more illusion than truth. The cracks in this story begin with psychology. In profiling crimes, we often look for psychological profiles that reveal not just who committed the crime, but why the environment enabled it. The Lindbergh family carried within them family secrets of tension and fear, hidden behind polished images of fame. They were never just a family. They were a monument to American achievement, and monuments once built often conceal fractures that the public cannot see. The small community around Hopewell was quiet, a small-town setting where rumors and whispers traveled faster than official news. Everyone knew who the Lindberghs were, yet few truly knew them. This distance between perception and reality becomes important in any small-town murder or kidnapping. The contrast between who the world believes someone is and who they truly are in the privacy of their walls. Charles Lindbergh himself was a man of contradictions. As a father, he was loving yet strict, present yet distant. As a husband, he carried pride and a sense of destiny. Yet pride and destiny can become blindfolds. In philosophy, the Stoics teach that fortune is never secure. What we cling to can be taken at any moment. Lindbergh had conquered the skies, but he could not conquer the fragility of human life. The kidnapping revealed this truth with merciless clarity. When we consider the psychological profile of potential suspects, we must also consider the victim's world. The Lindbergh home employed staff, servants, nurses, construction workers, handymen. These figures moved through the household like shadows, often unnoticed until tragedy forced their presence into the light. To criminal psychologists, this introduces a crucial dynamic. Crimes often emerge not from strangers in the dark, but from those within reach of trust. Proximity breeds opportunity, and when opportunity collides with motive, the ground for tragedy is prepared. In the 1930s, the Great Depression shaped lives with scarcity and envy. To abduct the Lindbergh child was not just a crime of opportunity, but for some, an assault on privilege itself. Within a society fractured by inequality, the symbolic child of America's most admired family became a dangerous target. A kidnapper's psychological profile in this climate might reveal deep inadequacy, resentment of status, and an obsession with control over the untouchable. The child, Charles Jr., never lived long enough to reveal his own personality in full. Yet the tragedy lies not only in the loss of potential, but in how quickly innocence can be shattered by the ambitions and resentments of others. In Buddhist philosophy, suffering is born from craving. In this crime, craving, whether for money, attention, or power, created a path that intersected fatally with an innocent life. Family secrets often hide beneath silence, and some later speculated that the Lindberghs, or those near them, may have carried roles more shadowed than admitted. These claims remain unproven, yet they reveal a deeper truth. After trauma, we do not only search for a culprit, we search for meaning. When meaning fails, suspicion turns inward, toward family, toward trust betrayed. From a criminological view, the Lindbergh baby kidnapping struck not only a child but a symbol. To seize the Lindbergh heir was to wound America's pride, turning Hopewell into the storm's unwilling epicenter. The characters in this story, Charles, Anne, the baby, the staff, the investigators, and the unseen kidnapper, form a stage where every action is magnified by history. To understand their motives, we must see beyond surfaces. The Lindberghs were not only victims of crime, but victims of expectation, privacy lost to fame, and safety lost to the illusion of control. We are left with the image of a family within a fragile fortress, its cracks hidden until silence was pierced by the cry of a missing child. Every tragedy is born from a web of people, places, and psychological tensions. Here, those unseen fractures erupted into the most infamous kidnapping in American history. The night began in stillness. The Lindbergh estate, surrounded by trees and set apart from the bustle of nearby towns, seemed cloaked in quiet. Yet silence, investigators often remind us, can be misleading. Inside, Charles Lindbergh Jr., just 20 months old, lay peacefully in his crib. It was the evening of March 1st, 1932, a night that, within hours, would erupt into one of the most infamous tragedies in American history. The timeline began with ordinary domestic rhythms. Anne Lindbergh placed her son upstairs in the nursery, while staff moved through their nightly routines. Nothing suggested danger. Yet later, witnesses recalled unusual sounds, noises too distinct to be dismissed as creaking wood or a rattling window. In criminology, such overlooked details become haunting. Moments that seem trivial in real time, but in hindsight, feel like warnings ignored. Sometime between 9 and 10, the first decisive breach occurred. A makeshift ladder was placed against the house. Crude in design and carelessly built, it spoke not of craftsmanship but of desperation. That ladder became more than evidence. It was a symbol, a fragile bridge between safety and intrusion. It showed how quickly barriers collapse when intent is strong enough to cross them. When the child was discovered missing, panic did not erupt instantly. Instead, there was confusion, disbelief, and a frantic search of the house. Every room was checked, every corridor echoed with hurried footsteps, but the crib was empty. In its place was a note, handwritten, demanding ransom. The words were sharp, misspelled, almost mocking in tone. Such cryptic notes reflect more than intent. They reveal psychology. Ransom notes are often a mirror of the mind behind them, disorganized, defiant, or sometimes deliberately misleading. The note demanded $50,000, an astronomical sum for the time. The ransom note demanded strict adherence to its rules, warning against police involvement. To profilers, its contradictions were telling. Clear instructions reflected planning, while poor grammar and erratic handwriting revealed insecurity. This blend of control and fear is common in criminal psychology, a fragile intellect striving for dominance. Meanwhile, suspicion turned inward. Household staff, nurses, servants, even laborers were questioned relentlessly. In crises, the mind searches for answers nearest at hand, magnifying every detail. A nurse mentioned strange movements on the grounds. A servant spoke of footsteps in the night. Yet inconsistencies plagued every account, and no solid evidence emerged. Suspicion, like a shadow, stretched across the estate, blurring the line between innocence and guilt. Investigators pressed forward with fragments. The crude ladder left impressions in the soil. A ransom note carried peculiar handwriting, its style analyzed endlessly by experts. Neighbors spoke of shadows flickering across the property line, but each clue contradicted the next, sending inquiry in circles. Was this the work of an outsider who dared breach the Lindbergh's sanctuary, or did betrayal lurk among those trusted most? The paradox of the Lindbergh kidnapping was clear. Every lead bred uncertainty instead of truth. Negotiations soon began. Notes arrived. Intermediaries were chosen. Money was prepared. Yet the child never came home. In criminology, delay is rarely neutral. It buys time or enforces power. Each unanswered day became its own cruel message. Weeks turned into months. The ransom was eventually paid, but Charles Jr. never returned. Hope ebbed into dread. The discovery of his body weeks later transformed the case from kidnapping into murder. His small form was found in the woods, not far from the Lindbergh home, already decomposed. The autopsy revealed a fractured skull, suggesting death occurred soon after abduction. The symbolic ransom thus became a hollow exchange, a theater of false negotiation when the child was already gone. Here the story takes its darkest turn. If the baby died almost immediately, why the elaborate ransom? One explanation is chaos. Many kidnappings unravel when initial plans collide with fear and a victim is silenced too soon. Another possibility is psychological control. Even after the child's death, the ransom allowed the perpetrator to maintain power, to stretch out the family's agony. In either case, cruelty outweighed reason. The timeline of March 1st reflects a collision of order and disorder. On the one hand, the ladder, the note, the ransom all suggest planning. On the other, the crude construction of the ladder, the chaotic handwriting, and the unnecessary prolongation of suffering suggest improvisation under stress. This duality is common in criminal psychology. Crimes rarely follow pure logic. They emerge from fractured minds, balancing intent with panic. Forensic evidence deepened rather than resolved the contradictions. Fingerprints on the ladder were smudged. The ransom notes contained unique flourishes, but could not be tied conclusively to a single hand. Witnesses contradicted one another. Some claimed to see lights, others saw nothing. A car parked nearby was described in multiple conflicting ways. In philosophy, this is the problem of perception. Truth fragments into perspectives, leaving certainty out of reach. The last seen alive detail remains haunting. To imagine a child in his crib, surrounded by supposed safety, only to vanish into the night, is to confront the fragility of what we call security. The Lindbergh estate, built to be a fortress, failed in its most essential duty. From a criminological view, the crime was not just an abduction, but a humiliation of safety itself. The sanctuary of family became the stage for America's greatest vulnerability. By the end of this timeline, one truth was undeniable. The crime was more than an act against a child. It was a symbolic act against a nation's sense of stability. Each strange behavior and contradictory clue magnified suspicion. Each unanswered question grew louder. Outsider or insider? Planned or improvised? Rational or desperate? The answers remained blurred, but the silence left in their place was deafening. And so the Lindbergh baby kidnapping entered history not merely as a crime, but as a puzzle of motives, failures, and fractured human intent. It was a night that began in stillness and ended in a silence so vast that nearly a century later, the echoes have not faded. The discovery of the Lindbergh kidnapping set in motion one of the most sprawling investigations in American history. From the very first hours, police flooded the estate, their lanterns and flashlights slicing through the quiet grounds. Yet the scale of attention soon became its own liability. Investigators were not only tasked with collecting evidence, but also burdened with the immense pressure of a nation demanding quick justice. In criminology, pressure breeds haste, and haste in turn distorts truth. The initial evidence seemed promising. The ladder leaned against the nursery window, the ransom note placed deliberately, and impressions left in the soil offered clear starting points. Fingerprint powder was applied, footprints measured, and samples collected. Yet even here, critical mistakes crept in. Too many officers moved through the nursery, contaminating prints. Too many curious hands touched the ransom note. The paradox of criminal investigation became clear. In the rush for answers, the silence that might have yielded clarity was destroyed. From the very start, police leaned toward the theory of an outsider. The handmade ladder suggested intrusion from beyond, while the ransom note pointed toward extortion rather than a domestic tragedy. Still, whispers spread quickly. Some suspected household staff, and others even wondered about Charles Lindbergh himself, whose fame was matched by an unsettling emotional detachment. In criminal psychology, suspicion often gravitates toward those closest to the victim, as the human mind seeks proximity when faced with an unthinkable crime. The ransom negotiations only deepened the mystery. Messages were delivered, coded instructions followed, yet the child never returned, leaving more questions than answers. Eventually, $50,000 in gold certificates was paid, their serial numbers carefully logged for future tracing. It was a strategy of both hope and foresight. Hope that the child would be restored, foresight that the trail of bills might one day point to the culprit. Yet the plan faltered. It would be years before one of those bills surfaced at a Bronx gas station, eventually leading investigators to Bruno Richard Hauptmann. The long gap between crime and capture reflects a familiar truth in criminal psychology. Some offenders crave control so deeply they stretch their crimes into the future, sustaining a private sense of power long after the act itself. When Charles Jr.'s body was discovered in the woods, the case shifted irrevocably from abduction to homicide. News of the child's death tore through America. Headlines screamed tragedy. Radios carried every rumor. Newspapers sold millions of copies. The Lindbergh case became one of America's first media spectacles. In the absence of television, the press transformed the kidnapping into serialized drama, with the public at once horrified and addicted. This media frenzy shaped the investigation itself. Every theory, no matter how implausible, was amplified. Some claimed organized crime targeted Lindbergh. Others whispered of foreign spies, political revenge, or domestic collusion. With each headline, clarity receded further. Witness statements contradicted one another, forensic leads dissolved in speculation, and the case itself grew less about evidence and more about narrative. In 1934, Bruno Hauptmann, a German immigrant and carpenter, was arrested after ransom bills were traced to him. His handwriting was compared to the ransom notes, and wood from his attic allegedly matched the ladder. For prosecutors, the case seemed airtight. For the public, his foreignness and modest background made him an easy villain. Yet controversy endures. Experts argue that the handwriting evidence was inconclusive, the wood comparison circumstantial, and Hauptmann's denials perhaps sincere. He went to the electric chair in 1936, insisting on his innocence. The uncertainty underscores a grim truth. Society often prefers closure over clarity, a conviction over the discomfort of ambiguity. Public reaction was unlike anything seen before. Americans followed the case as if it were a serialized tragedy, unfolding detail by detail. In the midst of the Great Depression, the kidnapping became a symbol of shattered innocence. If the Lindberghs, icons of success and national pride, were vulnerable, then no family was secure. Sociologically, the crime fractured the illusion of safety at home. Every locked door seemed thinner, every quiet night more fragile. Outrage soon reshaped law. The Federal Kidnapping Act of 1932, known as the Lindbergh Law, made interstate abduction a federal offense, a collective attempt at reparation, fortifying justice when innocence could not be restored. But even as laws hardened, suspicions softened into legend. Conspiracy theories flourished. Some believed multiple perpetrators were involved. Others argued the child had been hidden away rather than killed. Still others whispered of family complicity or buried truths. These theories reveal more about human psychology than about fact. Faced with unbearable loss, the mind resists finality. Conspiracies allow narratives to remain open, preventing silence from closing in. The town of Hopewell, once an ordinary community, became a site of pilgrimage. Visitors came to stare at the Lindbergh home, to walk the grounds, to stand where the ladder had stood. Crime has a strange power to transform geography into memory. For locals, this was a second violation. First the crime itself, then the intrusion of endless curiosity. For investigators, frustration lingered. Evidence contradicted itself, witnesses faltered, and media pressure twisted the search for truth. The Lindbergh case demonstrated a harsh criminological reality. The more symbolic a crime becomes, the harder it is to solve. Facts dissolve beneath the weight of meaning. By the time Hauptmann was executed, public hunger for closure was satisfied, but doubts persisted. Was he guilty, or a scapegoat chosen to soothe national anxiety? The ambiguity remains a wound. Justice, like memory, can comfort, but it can also deceive. For some, the execution marked an ending. For others, it layered another silence atop the original tragedy. In the end, the Lindbergh investigation revealed not just the limits of forensic science in the 1930s, but the fragility of human perception under pressure. What began as a crime became a stage upon which America projected its fears, inequalities, and longing for certainty. And in that projection, the truth may have slipped away forever. The Lindbergh baby kidnapping is a crime that refuses easy resolution because it forces us to confront the deepest recesses of human psychology. At its core, this was never only about who stole a child, but why any human being would choose such an act. Criminologists studying the killer's mindset often describe a volatile fusion of desperation, opportunity, and pathology. In the Lindbergh case, all three were present, woven together in a way that continues to disturb even now. Kidnapping is among the most intimate of crimes. Unlike theft or assault, it requires observation, planning, and the deliberate invasion of a family's most sacred space. To take a child is not only to breach security, but to rupture the primal bond of protection between parent and child. Trauma psychologists argue that such acts are seldom random. They are born of obsession, whether with wealth, dominance, or the symbolic destruction of innocence. For America in 1932, the Lindbergh baby was not simply a child, but a living symbol of national hope. To harm him was to pierce the American psyche itself. From a psychological profile standpoint, the offender likely battled feelings of inadequacy. In the shadow of the Great Depression, when millions felt powerless, resentment often grew against those untouched by hardship. Charles Lindbergh, aviation hero and national icon, embodied triumph and purity. To abduct his son may have been a grotesque way of leveling the scales, an act of symbolic retribution rather than mere crime. Psychology often shows that inferiority drives people to grasp for control where none exists. By taking a child, the offender claimed ultimate power over a family, over a nation, and over the illusion of safety itself. Resentment alone cannot explain the chilling precision of this act. Trauma research shows that those capable of such cruelty often display emotional detachment, a numbness tied to antisocial traits. The silent nursery, the broken ladder, and the wooded grave all suggest a mind able to sever empathy with surgical calm. Philosophically, this detachment echoes the Stoic warning: suppressed emotions may harden into cruelty. Here, silence spoke louder than any scream. The aftermath reveals how trauma spreads outward. For the Lindberghs, grief became an enduring shadow. Psychologists describe complicated grief, a mourning without closure, where questions outweigh memory. Charles Lindbergh, already emotionally reserved, retreated further into distance. Anne Morrow Lindbergh turned sorrow into literary expression, weaving loss into her voice. Trauma does not die with the victim. It reshapes the very identities of those left behind. The nation, too, carried the wound. Americans of the 1930s, already scarred by economic despair, now faced the truth that no wealth or fame could guarantee innocence. Sociologists call this collective trauma, events so powerful they engrave themselves on cultural memory. Later generations would remember the assassinations of Kennedy or King. In the same way, the Lindbergh kidnapping became a shared scar, a reminder of vulnerability in the American dream. Why does the case still haunt us? Because humans cannot bear silence. In Buddhist thought, suffering is inherent, yet people continually seek explanations to soften its weight. When confronted with an unsolved crime, we invent theories, suspects, conspiracies. The Lindbergh kidnapping became a breeding ground for speculation. Without clarity, the human mind filled the void, ensuring the why echoed endlessly across generations. Christian theology framed the act as a desecration of innocence. To strike at a child is to rupture the moral order, recalling King Herod's biblical massacre meant to extinguish hope. For those steeped in Christianity, the kidnapping carried apocalyptic undertones, not just a crime, but a spiritual violation. Believers were forced to face the problem of evil. How could God permit such loss? For some, faith deepened, resting in mystery. For others, it fractured beneath the silence of heaven. Confucian philosophy, by contrast, would view the crime as a breakdown of harmony. The child represents lineage and continuity. To steal that continuity is to rupture not only personal love, but the moral fabric of society itself. In this sense, the Lindbergh kidnapping attacked more than one household. It symbolically threatened the stability of the nation's families. Still, the question of justice lingers. Bruno Richard Hauptmann's 1936 conviction satisfied some, but left many unconvinced. If guilty, his execution marked a grim assertion of order over chaos. If innocent, the state compounded tragedy with injustice. Nietzsche warned, "Whoever fights monsters should see to it that in the process he does not become a monster." In its zeal, the machinery of justice may have mirrored the very cruelty it sought to punish. The case continues to haunt precisely because it resists final interpretation. Each theory, outside a kidnapping, inside collusion, lone criminal, conspiracy, illuminates fragments while leaving shadows. This elusiveness makes the case archetypal. It reminds us that crime is not always about resolution, but about confronting the limits of human comprehension. Closure remains beyond reach, and in that absence lies the essence of trauma. The aftermath reshaped both law and culture. The Lindbergh Law, elevating kidnapping to a federal crime, remains a legal monument to this tragedy. Meanwhile, countless books, films, and studies emerged, each an attempt to wrestle with the unresolvable. Crime leaves behind more than victims, it leaves stories, the narratives by which societies process fear and search for meaning. Perhaps the most chilling insight is this: the Lindbergh kidnapping was not only about an offender or a family, it was about all of us. It exposed collective vulnerability, our craving for control, our fear of the unknown. It revealed how quickly meaning collapses, and how desperately we rebuild it through speculation, law, and cultural memory. And so we return to the image of the silent crib, the broken ladder, the unanswered questions. Some mysteries endure because they reflect something eternal about human nature, that the search for meaning collides with silence, the urge for justice collides with ambiguity, and the true shadows of crime often live not only in the perpetrator, but in us all. The Lindbergh baby kidnapping is remembered not simply as a crime, but as a mirror reflecting human fear, obsession, and the fragile thread of innocence. It reminds us how easily safety can collapse, even within the walls of privilege. Nearly a century later, it endures as one of America's most infamous unsolved mysteries, a cold case wrapped in unanswered questions and shadows that still whisper across generations. More than a story of loss, it forces us to face our own vulnerability and the unsettling silence left behind. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to discover more stories exploring the psychology of crime. Some crimes leave no screams, only questions, and some silences echo louder than any confession. Thank you for listening to Criminal Mindcast.
References 1. Griffin, J. 2001. The Lindbergh Kidnapping Case. Putnam. An Analysis of Investigation Failures and Cultural Aftermath. Point 2. Larson, E. 2013. The Devil in the White City. Vintage. A chilling exploration of psychology behind historic American crimes. Point 3. Smith, J. 2019. America's Cold Cases. HarperCollins. A study of unresolved mysteries and their enduring impact on collective imagination.